Apple just held their worldwide developer conference, and as an Apple fan, there was a lot to like about these announcements. New iOS customization options, new processors, new hardware, and new ways to work on both Mac and iOS. As a musician, however, and especially as a musician who frequently uses their iPad to create music, there wasn't really a lot to get excited about, really. Hey, it's Patrick. In this video, I'm going to share a few things that I think you might find interesting from Apple's WWDC 2022 keynote. Apple unveiled not only the successor to their game-changing M1 chip, the M2 chip, they also announced two new Macs that would use it, a newly redesigned MacBook Air and the same 13-inch MacBook Pro design from 2020, with the M1 chip swapped out for an M2 chip. Spec junkies will be happy to hear that the M2 is quite a bit speedier than the M1 chip. Apple were quick to show off their famously vague graphs to illustrate this. Just to be clear, this new M2 chip is not meant to be a replacement for the M1 Pro and M1 Max chips found in last year's new MacBook Pros, or the M1 Max and M1 Ultra chips found in this year's Mac Studios. This M2 chip is a replacement for the base M1 chip only. The new MacBook Air design looks really nice. Great screen, MagSafe, more ports, spatial audio support, lovely. Bar the addition of a notch on the display. This is just my opinion, but I really wasn't a fan of it when they introduced it on the screens of the MacBook Pro models released last year, and it looks just as goofy here. With the MacBook Air's new design and increased power comes an increased price tag. The new MacBook Air starts at £1,250 here in the UK, that's $1,200 in the US, and that's with the same base specs as the 2020 MacBook Air. 8GB of RAM, a tiny 256GB SSD storage, and an 8-core GPU instead of a 10-core GPU. So you're paying a bit more for the new fresh design and new processor. What's interesting is that Apple also put the M2 chip into the 13-inch MacBook Pro. Its design remains identical to the 2020 model. It starts at £100 more for the base model than the MacBook Air does, has a 10-core GPU out of the gate and an actual cooling system, while the MacBook Air remains fanless. So theoretically, you should be seeing a better performance from this new MacBook Pro than in the new MacBook Air. You also lose the stupid notch, but gain a stupid touch bar. All of that means that if you're looking for an entry-level MacBook that's portable but also powerful enough to run programs like Garageband, Logic, and Final Cut Pro, you've got a tough choice ahead of you, and you're going to have to compromise somewhere. Except maybe not. In a blink and you'll miss it product lineup, Apple revealed that they are still selling the 2020 MacBook Air with the M1 chip. Now, Apple being Apple, they haven't reduced the price on it at all in the Apple Store. It's still £999 or $999 for the base model. But you can bet your ass that as soon as the new MacBook Air models become available, a heck of a lot of 2020 MacBook Airs are going to hit the refurbished and second-hand market. So if you're in the market for a cheap Apple Silicon Mac and can bear to wait a little bit longer, you could just grab yourself a great deal. Apple unveiled the latest versions of macOS, dubbed Ventura.
Yes, Satan?
iOS and iPadOS. And there are some very nice new features. Stage Manager in particular looks like it'll really help my workflow personally, and it was great to see that it'll land on both Mac and iPad, though not every iPad. More on that in a sec. And stuff like continuity camera is simultaneously really quite innovative while also being the most Apple thing ever. Why improve the webcams on your Macs when instead you can over-engineer a solution that requires users to purchase a wee plastic adapter to use? That's very Apple. Joking aside, and again as an everyday Apple user, all of these features look great and I am really excited for them. But there is no getting away from the fact that there was nothing here for folks who create on their iPad or iPhone. Those pro apps that have been rumoured to be coming for years now were once again a no-show. And while it's not impossible that Apple would release iPad versions of Final Cut or Logic later in the week of WWDC, they have been so heavily requested at this point that I think they would want to make a bit of a song and dance about them and talk about them in the keynote. It does beg the question whether we will ever see a version of Logic on the iPad, or whether Apple will continue to turn a blind eye to users who are looking for a more powerful Apple-made DAW than Garageband on iOS. As excited as I've been at the prospect of a version of Logic on iPad, I have wondered how Apple would make it compatible with all current iPad models, as it's highly unlikely that Apple would split its iPad user base by making Pro apps only for Pro iPad models. Well, that's exactly what they have done this year. Amazing new iPad OS features that creators might actually find really useful, like Stage Manager, full resolution external display support, and virtual memory swap, which allows your iPad to use free storage as extra memory, just like a Mac does, are only available on iPad models that have an M1 chip. That's current iPad Pro models and the 2022 iPad Air. Other iPads do not get these features, meaning that if you grabbed yourself the otherwise excellent redesigned iPad mini last year, or are still rocking a very capable 2018 or 2020 iPad Pro, you are not going to see any of this. And that sucks. I really didn't mean this video to be as negative as it turned out, but that's just the way the cookie crumbles, I guess. There are many, many more features announced at WWDC 2022. And as tempting as it may be to spend nearly 2 hours bathing in the unfiltered sexual magnetism of Craig Federighi, Pete Johns has a supercut that will tell you everything you need to know. Check the linky in the dinky for that one. Let me know your thoughts on this latest Apple event down in the comments, and feel free not to pull any punches at that. And if you want to see a grumpy Scottish guy moan about more Apple flavoured stuff, then watch this video next.